All right, I know we just escaped death at the hands of Dr. Hashimoto and his antibody henchmen, but it's time for our next mission. Again, our focus here is hypothyroidism. We'll start with iodine deficiency, the most common cause of hypothyroidism worldwide. We'll also introduce a few drugs that disrupt thyroid function. The main focus, however, will be thyroiditis. There are some acute transient versions, sure. Give it a few months and you're back to normal. Don't get too carried away, though. This is Casino Rydell. You might come here with all the money and thyroid hormone in the world, but you'll leave broke, and chronically thyroid deficient. We're not here for the gambling, however. Our mission? Disrupt this entire illegal thyroid hormone operation. Along the way, we'll be taking a few lumps, forming some nodules maybe, and goiters, so many goiters. Let's start this discussion with the very first ingredient any criminal enterprise needs before starting production. In order to make thyroid hormone, the body needs iodine, a trace mineral obtained by consuming seafood, cow's milk, and foods grown in iodine-rich soil. Additionally, many countries around the world have initiated iodine prophylaxis programs, such as the iodization of salt in the US and Canada. Nevertheless, many populations don't have access to iodine-containing foods. On top of that, there are still many countries around the world that don't have iodine prophylaxis programs in place. Thus, iodine deficiency remains a serious public health concern, affecting over 1 billion people. In fact, the most common cause of hypothyroidism worldwide is dietary iodine deficiency, also known as endemic goiter. Again, to convey hypothyroidism, the bartender in the back there is wearing that untied thyroid bow tie. And in this scene, it's not dietary iodine we're worried about. Take a look at that empty briefcase. It looks like someone has thwarted the illegal iodine smuggling ring headquarters right here at Casino Rydell. You see, this criminal organization works kind of like a thyroid gland. Iodine comes in, it gets processed, and is used to produce iodine bombs. Which, I guess, is not like the thyroid gland at all. But just hear me out. As we described in Sketchy Farm, iodine is taken up by the thyroid and attached to thyroid hormone precursor molecules. After some extra processing, storage, and cleaving, the thyroid releases both T3 and T4. T4 in greater quantities. T4 is represented by a T4 time bomb set to 4 minutes. The more potent form of T4 is T3, and most of this conversion occurs out in the periphery, represented by an activated time bomb counting down from 3 minutes 59 seconds. So back at the casino, we've got iodine deficiency, and that means diminished thyroid hormone production. T4 is the one we measure. So let's represent low serum T4 levels with a concealed T4 time bomb falling to the floor. Just not Velcroed correctly, I guess. Okay, you laugh, but the directions for attaching that thing to the underside of a wooden surface are really confusing. When thyroid hormone is low, the pituitary responds by sending out more thyroid-stimulating hormone, or TSH. As you know by now, our recurring symbol for the thyroid is a bow tie. Thyroid-stimulating hormone, then, is represented by a guy tightening his bow tie, like our next henchman here. Tightening his bow tie as that T4 time bomb drops to the floor. Little overconfident, as usual. Side note, T4 can also be normal. This can be seen in the setting of subclinical hypothyroidism. Subclinical disease means it's concealed, not showing any symptoms, just waiting for the right moment to strike. So we have a normal T4 time bomb still concealed under the counter. It just goes to show that an elevated TSH is the most important and most sensitive lab value to look out for. Now, about that endemic goiter we mentioned earlier. Excessive amounts of TSH from the pituitary will, over time, cause hypertrophy and hyperplasia of thyroid follicular cells, and eventually thyroid gland enlargement, also known as goiter. In most individuals, actually, the larger gland is able to produce an adequate amount of hormone, and the patient achieves a euthyroid state. At first, the goiter is diffusely enlarged. Just think of this clenched fist here on the bartender's collar. Just a big mass. With long-standing iodine deficiency, however, the goiter becomes nodular. This occurs because of repeated episodes of iodine availability, or decreased need for thyroid hormone, interspersed by periods of iodine scarcity. The gland involutes when iodine is abundant, grows when iodine is lacking, grows, involutes, until you're left with an irregularly enlarged nodular goiter, represented by this irregularly crumpled collar that's been grabbed by one too many angry crime bosses. Not to mention all those nodular-looking bruises and scars he's accumulated over the years. Interestingly, when iodine is reintroduced to an individual with endemic goiter and chronic iodine deficiency, it can actually cause hyperthyroidism or even frank thyrotoxicosis. The thyroid does a complete 180. This occurs when certain areas of that nodular goiter develop autonomously functioning thyroid tissue. So when there's more iodine around, these hungry nodules devour that iodine and pump out hormone. This is represented here by one of the casino employees who seems to have been pickpocketing a portion of those iodine shipments for himself. As the furious crime boss raises that T4 in the air, imagine a paradoxical hyperthyroid state induced by iodine supplementation. Enlargement of the thyroid gland can sometimes cause compression of surrounding structures, also known as obstructive goiter. Tracheal compression can present with dyspnea and stridor, and recurrent laryngeal nerve compression can cause hoarseness. Rarely, there can be esophageal compression resulting in dysphagia, and jugular vein compression leading to superior vena cava syndrome. All right, instead of just not feeding the thyroid, it's time to knock it out completely. In our last sketch, we met Dr. Hashimoto, the embodiment of Hashimoto's thyroiditis, the most common cause of hypothyroidism in iodine-sufficient regions. Dr. Hashimoto's got a couple of pincher hands because it involves an autoimmune attack of the thyroid. On histology, you'll see a lymphocytic infiltrate with lots of germinal centers. There can be a transient hyperthyroid period as the gland releases all its stored hormone, represented by that bright red bow tie. But then a progressive hypothyroid situation with low T4. And remember, loss of negative feedback to the pituitary leads to high levels of TSH, which can lead to the overstimulation of thyroid and goiter formation. In the case of Hashimoto's, it's non-tender. Well, time to put the itis back in thyroiditis, with 3 more inflammatory disorders of the thyroid: Rydell's thyroiditis, Ducker-Van's thyroiditis, and subacute lymphocytic thyroiditis. Let's start with Rydell's, a rare fibrosing thyroiditis of unknown etiology. It's not entirely clear why, but inflammatory cells start to infiltrate the thyroid gland. We're talking neutrophils, eosinophils, lymphocytes, plasma cells, everyone's showing up to the party. Just think of all those blue lights covering the thyroid bow tie sign, evoking an image of all those little blue nuclei you'll see on histology. And it's not just the thyroid gland. The inflammatory infiltrate takes over pretty much everything around the thyroid: adipose tissue, muscles, nerves, vessels, and you know the rest of the story. Cytokines get released, and fibroblasts are activated. Over time, the inflammatory infiltrate becomes less prevalent as the thyroid is taken over by fibrous tissue, as depicted by those fibrotic vines surrounding the sign. But again, notice that the vines are spreading out in all directions. Fibrosis extends beyond the thyroid capsule and into the surrounding neck tissues. And here's the weirdest part. Rydell's thyroiditis is also associated with various forms of systemic fibrosis, embodied by the return of Agent Sean, here to poop on the party of corruption. He's the ultimate Debbie Downer. But instead of a family gathering or awkward party, he's here to bring down the mood of villainy. If he could just get himself free of that shrubbery he was sneaking around in. Rydell's thyroiditis may, in fact, be a part of a spectrum of IgG4-related systemic diseases, which cause fibroinflammatory lesions rich in IgG4-secreting plasma cells. High levels of IgG4 antibodies are represented here at the top of the sign as 4 flashing IgG antibody playing cards. Other manifestations of this IgG-related systemic disease include retroperitoneal fibrosis, autoimmune pancreatitis, chronic sclerosing aortitis, and other sclerosing conditions. It's becoming increasingly recognized that all of these conditions are more related than previously thought. For the clinical manifestations, it's time to introduce our next villain, Miss Rydell herself. Look at this noob here.